He's a retired professional butler who wrote a book called The Butler Wore Guccis. Well, after making contact with this gentleman, I was intrigued by the world that he worked in because I had heard about it, but I just couldn't believe it. So this was a great opportunity to hear some more. So Tom, first of all, welcome to our show. And can you explain to our audience what a butler does and what type of person would need those kind of services?
Well, basically, we're dealing with an exceptionally wealthy level of lifestyle. And in a true situation of a butler with understaff, that is at least minimum, I would imagine, 4 or 5 fellow workers inside the house, staff members from the kitchen to the chauffeur to a personal maid. The butler technically is in charge of running the house and is responsible for all the interior functions of the house at the given time. Also, a butler usually traveled with the family. Anybody that had a butler would also have more than one residence. So, for example, it would be New York, the Hamptons, and for the winter season, usually Palm Beach.
In regard to that, when your employers move to another house in another part of the world, how did they behave then? Did they behave differently because these were other people, or did they keep up the facade of being rich? In other words, did they treat those people differently than they did the people in New York or wherever you originated with them?
No, basically, my experience, I only traveled with a full household staff that moved from one residence to the next. I mean, in my day, this is going back into the 60s, it was the last vestige of that magical lifestyle that you see in the Gilded Age and Downton Abbey. There was live-in staff versus day help was worlds apart. And so my whole background and experience was really only with the super uber wealthy of the day.
So there was class distinction between the employer who was super rich, and then within the household, sounds like there was class distinction. Your little crew that traveled with your employer, and then the pickup members, almost like a performing group that picks up extra musicians to play the music to make them look better.
That's fairly accurate. Again, I would say that because I came from a middle class background myself, that I was doing it as not an amusement, but an interesting way of making a livelihood after high school. I didn't go to college directly. So it just happened that I only associated with the super rich that actually would have minimum of 5 staff. And they're the only pickup, as you're phrasing it, would be like the outside maintenance people, but everyone traveled with the family.
Could you share with us some of the families and what made them rich or gave them the stature to live that lifestyle?
Well, again, we're going back to the mid-1960s when I took my first summertime job up in Newport, Rhode Island for a woman named Mrs. Robert R. Young, whose husband was New York Central Railroad CEO, and Mrs. Young's sister was Georgia O'Keeffe. And that house on the Cliff Walk was the neighbor to the Breakers, the famous Vanderbilt mansion. So that was one. Down in Palm Beach, I worked for Meriwether Post, who most likely was the last queen of Palm Beach, because there were 45 of us in staff. The staff had staff, wow. And there was the upper staff and lower staff. And being a junior butler, I was the upper staff. I never cleaned my room. I never did any of my clothing. It was all prepared for me. But I also worked for members of old WASPy families, the Burdens and the Paysons and the Vanderbilts. They were also very staid, very formal lifestyles.
Well, the people who were second or third generation money, were they different than the people who became rich at that time?
Yes, yeah. The people. It's an interesting question because I had decided after I left Mrs. Post that I only wanted to work for people with a decent staff and a decent relationship with the staff.
Makes sense.
I didn't want someone to consider me a servant. I never took a job where I wasn't a staff member. And there were wealthy people that, not to the manner born, but did have a decent relationship with the staff.
I'm sure that some of your employers had celebrities stop by and very famous people. Did you ever get an opportunity to have a one-on-one with them?
Qualified, yes. The two major locations working at Mar-a-Lago for Mrs. Post, Dina Merrill was her daughter, her one daughter. She had other daughters. She married 4 times, Mrs. Post. But Dina Merrill and Cliff Robinson and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, I have a whole story of how I had to retrieve his slipper at a formal dinner party because he lost it under the table. And Rose Kennedy, who I accidentally spilled some soup on because somebody bumped my hand. And when I worked for the Levys, Mrs. Levy was William Paley's sister, William Paley of CBS. And they flew down one season to visit the mother, Goldie Paley, and Truman Capote came along, which really, shall we say, livened things up for that brief dinner party.
How did he fit in with all of this old money, so to speak? And, you know,
Truman,
like, was he there as entertainment or did they take him seriously?
oh no, this was before Answered Prayers hit the fan. And actually Truman and the Paleys were on their way to the Paleys' Bahama residence. And they came down on the CBS jet, but they stopped over in Palm Beach so that Bill could have lunch with his mother, Goldie Paley, who was in her 90s, that I also played cards with quite often, both there and up in Philadelphia. So no, Truman was a guest. I mean, he was his typical self and the voice, and but he was relaxed because he was safe. He wasn't performing. He just was being himself, which is enough.
Well, that's what I meant, because a lot of times at several dinner parties that I've gone to, they've invited celebrities just to make chit chat, and that was the entertainment for everybody at the party.
Well, that's very accurate, but because I was a male, Caucasian, American, educated, not bad looking, 40 years ago, weren't we all? It was a different experience because the people were very interested in having a good time, and it didn't necessarily have to focus around one given person. Mrs. Post gave those square and round dances every Thursday for a sit-down buffet of up to 100 people. So it was amazing, the volume of people that
Just
I
a
was
few
exposed
intimate
to.
friends.
Yeah, you could say that.
If you could have been a butler to anybody in the world, who would you choose and why?
Hildegard Schein, Mrs. J. Meyer Schein, was the wife of a Russian immigrant who made his fortune. He came over from Russia and amassed the hotels, the movie theaters, the miles of oceanfront in Florida. And Hildegard, I mean, I live on 65th Street in a townhouse on the 3rd floor, not the whole townhouse, but Hildegard had the whole floor on 4 East 66 touching Temple Emmanuel. And that's where I was a butler. But she was great. She was unpretentious. She's the one that allowed me to take the Rolls-Royce limousine home to my parents every night because there wasn't sleeping accommodations in the apartment for me. So Hildegard was always my favorite.
Did you enjoy the way you spent your time as a butler?
Oh, absolutely. It was a game. I never took it seriously. I went from one job to another simply because I either got bored or I wanted more money. But no, it was a different world. There was snobby butlers and condescending parlor maids, and the secretaries were the worst. The personal secretaries were absolutely the worst people because they thought they were so far above, even above the butler status, which they weren't. You know, so.
I saw on the list that you gave me of who you were employed by, I saw Mrs. Bernard Gimble. Is that Sophie Gimble?
No, it's Alva Gimble. She was married. She was married to Bernard. And it's funny, I had a constant relationship with all my ladies and in speaking to them. And it was really wonderful. And she once told me, remember, Bernard was a merchant, whereas Mrs. Gimble came from, what was it called? It was called Our Crowd, which was the Jewish version of the SR. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, my father was very concerned that I was considering marrying somebody in trade. But I mean, that's why my story is so wonderful. It's all these incredible insights into this lifestyle. I mean, nowadays people build these mansions. When I go past them, I wonder how they staff them. Are all the toilets clean? Really? Who does it? Because I mean, that joke, good help is hard to find. And it's even harder to keep it once you find it.
Well, Tom, I really learned a lot about a culture that I would never think about, except it's them and we're on the other side of the tracks. But wow. It's just interesting. And I want to thank you for coming and joining me today with this conversation. And we'll do it again sometime.
A real pleasure. And I'll look forward to maybe running into you down in Miami.
I invited Thomas Gardner to join me in a conversation really based on the title of his book, The Butler Wore Guccis. When I saw that title, I says, this is going to be a great read. We'll get some gossip, some behind the scenes stories, and a butler's view of that verified world. Well, just like any other profession, he was nothing like that. He didn't share any of the gossip. He always was respectful in talking about his clients. And most of all, he enjoyed getting up every morning and being the butler. Well, on any job in any profession, you can't ask for anything more than that. So I guess that's the whole story for now. Until next time, have a good time. I'm Stewart Stewart, and this has been Conversation with Stewart Stewart.